Yeah. Did I ever tell you about my dad and computers?
No.
So my dad absolutely hated the idea of computers.
Oh, I love the man. Yeah.
And I believe I know why. Because my dad was the kind of guy who like literally would watch something work and then be able to strip it down, put it back together, like
Right.
all this kind of
And
stuff.
this is voodoo.
His workplace like switched over their machines. Like this is at Weston's Bakery. He was like the caretaker and stuff.
Okay.
So his workshop had like piles of stuff that he would just tinker with.
Right.
And they changed to new computers in the offices, and he brought one home, and it was one of those like all self-contained IBMs with like the green screen and keyboard and stuff. And it sat on his workbench in the garage for about a week. And then I noticed the back had been taken off of it. And then it was in the dumpster. And from that point on, my dad literally would not coddle to having computer devices in the house. Nice. No internet, no smartphones, no flip phones, even like nothing like that.
Nice.
Yeah. Away we go in 3, 2, and 1. I'm Deacon Eric.
And I'm Dr. Brett Salkeld.
And you're listening to Thinking Faith.
This is a podcast brought to you by the Archdiocese of Regina, where we attempt to navigate this winding road of faith in Jesus Christ so that we might know Him more intimately, love Him more profoundly, and together serve Him more deeply in our daily lives.
Welcome, everyone, to another week of Thinking Faith. Very happy to have you back with us. I think this is going to be our first episode after like a summer hiatus.
It might be.
Yeah.
We're going to record a few here, so it depends what order we put them in.
So yeah,
we'll see. We're here in June, and this will come out in September.
Sometime there. Yeah. So welcome back after...
All this time travel is like, I'm getting disoriented.
It is, yeah. That'll be the next thing. We have to do a time travel episode. Yeah.
Hopefully what we talk about is still true.
And relevant.
By the time we get to September.
I mean, that's always our hope, that we say something relevant in the particular time and place.
But we're coming out of an Easter season.
Mm-hmm. That was quite remarkable.
That was remarkable.
Yeah.
From the point of view of, if not global Catholicism, at least Catholicism in the Western world.
Yeah.
North America, Western Europe. I haven't seen a lot of
Northern
numbers
Hemisphere, Europe.
out of Australia, which is often lumped in culturally with that. But that North and West saw like stunning increases in some cases in the number of new Catholics entering the church at Easter.
Paris was the one that got on my radar.
France in general, and Paris in particular.
I would not have called that.
Right.
Like France seemed to be the, moving towards the model of a post-Christian society.
Right.
And we'll talk about why that might have changed.
So so across Europe, France and the UK, I know I've done a little more reading about, so I can speak to some particulars, but they weren't unique. Sweden.
Yeah, that's another one. Sweden would be like another poster child.
Like nobody saw that coming.
Yeah.
Sweden. But also North America. North American dioceses reporting the single largest year-over-year increases in people being received into the church at Easter. Los Angeles, Vancouver.
Yeah.
And then...
It would be interesting. I don't think we've done comparisons in our diocese yet, but it would be interesting to see those numbers. Have you been looking?
So I only have anecdotes. I don't have data.
Yeah, that's what I've
But when I told the story about France in the lunchroom, and Bishop Don said Resurrection Parish has a larger than average group this year.
Yeah.
I was just in Melville, and part of what we'll talk about, either this episode or the continuation, is some of what I did in my talk at St. Henry's in Melville. And they said they've got bigger numbers than they've typically seen, both in terms of people becoming Catholic, but also attendance at like Good Friday, Easter, Christmas. Like there's more people than there have been.
And I would say at Christ the King Parish in Regina here, that's where I'm at.
Where you're stationed.
Yeah, we found a larger than average and larger than expected group of RCIA candidates this year received into the church. A number of those were coming from smaller parishes joining our group that they didn't have, but still, those are from other communities like next door, with people seeking and stuff as well. And
it's not larger because they used to have a big one and then they got smaller, so they all got consolidated at Christ the King.
That's exactly
that happened a couple decades ago.
Yes.
And so this is an increase in the base numbers.
Yeah, these are communities that haven't had people approaching them for some time.
Right.
Yeah. And then they don't have the infrastructure in place, and they recognize, hey, our neighboring parish has this already going. And
So, that was part of the story in France. And then I have to tell a story about my home parish.
Okay.
Because I said I have anecdotes, but not data.
Yeah.
But the France, one of the wildest things in France was several dioceses. Well, maybe it's not several. I don't remember exactly. At least one diocese, but I think more than one. Did not have the infrastructure to receive everyone at Easter.
Yeah.
So they set up a sort of a second cohort that would be received sometime in the fall, because they just don't have enough people, like teachers, catechists to train people and lead them through RCIA, OCIA.
Yeah.
So the story from St. Wenceslas, my mom leads OCIA in St. Wenceslas. So for people who don't know, St. Wenceslas is in Gerald. Tiny parish.
Tiny.
Like the town has like 125 people in the village.
But a great community.
Great community. Yeah. The church has lasted longer than a lot of churches in similar sized communities.
Yeah.
There's probably 30 to 40 relatively active parishioners.
Yeah. Which is also unique to some smaller communities.
Right. Yeah. And so I was talking to my mom on the phone and told her about this article I read about what was happening in France. And she said, well, it's just too bad that that's not happening here. I said, Mom, who's in your OCIA class? Well, first of all, you're in small town Saskatchewan with 125 people in the village and 30 to 40 parishioners. You should be happy to have an OCIA at all.
At all. Right? Yeah.
So I said, who's in your OCIA? Well, 2 young men, unchurched. Now, young men have come into the church before. Mm-hmm. In St. Wenceslas, but the story is almost always the same. They're marrying a Catholic girl.
Yes.
That's the number one reason.
Yeah.
Here's 2 guys who are not marrying Catholic girls who have come to the church independently, unchurched. One was a militant atheist for a while. Nice. And both of them looking for something more than the culture has to offer. So I said, Mom, from a percentage point of view, you're doing better than France. Like,
yeah, we always forget to do kind of that math, right?
Anyways, so we're seeing it, and everywhere I go, I talk to people that they have anecdotes.
Yeah.
For more people coming into the church in this last year, and the numbers were like the growth was dramatic. Like in 2022, 2023, it maybe slight upticks, and then like all of a sudden, like 40% increase in some dioceses.
And this is what I found. We were talking about this before the show, like a couple of days ago. I found that this year with our lay formation program.
Right.
Radical changes in both the demographics and the numbers. And a large percentage are people who are either rediscovering their Catholic faith or have just come into the Catholic faith from other either other Christian denominations or where they have fallen off themselves or from no faith background.
Well, and this is interesting. So I haven't seen a lot of data on what's happening in other Christian communities. But my general sense is Catholicism is at least overrepresented here. Mm-hmm. This isn't simply Christianity is becoming cool again or something. Like Catholicism in particular seems to have some cachet culturally right now, which is a fascinating kind of thing. Now, I wanted to touch on something because you mentioned demographics.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's worth noting there are some demographic trends that inform what's going on, but they're not sufficient to explain the whole dynamic. So 2 things in particular. The obvious one is immigration.
Yeah.
So in the lay formation program at parishes here in the city, people, Vietnamese, Nigerian, Filipino communities are growing.
Yeah.
in
African communities
right.
as well.
Yeah. Primarily I've met mostly Nigerian. Did I say Nigerian? I meant to. Anyways,
maybe you did.
And that's the single largest African community being represented here, but there are other smaller ones too. But those people by and large are not entering the church because they were Catholic when they moved here.
And they're bringing their cultural Catholicism with them, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So they might be filling the churches more than they were full before their arrival, but they're by and large not new converts, right? So they account for part of what we're seeing, but not the very specific thing we're talking about here. The second thing demographically that's important in a place like France, for example, is this dynamic of someone who's 25 years old coming to the church and being baptized, receiving this sacraments of initiation at Easter. 20 years ago, there was a higher percentage chance that person was baptized as an infant.
Yeah.
And so when they came back to the church as an adult, their relationship with the church is analogous to what's happening to the person today. But as a statistic, it looks different because they just started going to church again.
Yeah.
They weren't received into the church. So that accounts, the fact that a lot of the young people today in a place like France didn't have any sacraments when they were young accounts for some of the uptick. Yeah. That in previous generations would have just been people who came back to church as adults but didn't register as a statistic. But that is not enough to account for all of it. That just accounts for some of it.
Yeah,
right?
For just a portion.
So anyways, it's important to watch for demographics to get a sense of the context of what's happening.
Yeah.
But even granted all of that, young people, and this is the thing, all the data shows that this is overwhelmingly a phenomenon of people like 18 to 30.
Yeah.
Which is a fascinating thing.
It's actually the demographic that was even as early as last year, the most problematic from a perspective of people not being in church, not interested in church. Right. The rising nuns were largely within that group of people either who were raised in Catholic homes and walked away from the faith, and intentionally starting to.
Right.
That's what we started to see with this rise of the nuns, and that too, as well as people who just never were interested in faith at all.
And it's important to point out that this doesn't indicate that group has stopped having appeal, or that no one is joining that group, though it does seem to have leveled off. Yes. The increase in the number of nuns seems to have kind of leveled off.
But we did see that over the last couple of years.
Yes, that has been over
plateauing
almost half a decade. But it's not in decline. It's not like that's in decline while Catholicism is on the increase. Rather, both of these things are becoming the dominant expressions, and the middle ground is disappearing.
That's it. Yes.
Right? This sort of vague Christianity that you're sort of committed to, that seems to be the thing that's on the decline, and both a more full-throated, embodied embrace of Christian faith on the one hand, or a rejection of religion in general on the other end, both seem to be, although this one has kind of plateaued, those seem to be the more prominent options, rather than those two things being in a zero-sum game. It's actually the, what you might call the mushy middle that's kind of losing to both.
Losing ground, which is interesting as you say that, because we've talked about kind of this movement culturally towards extremes, in general, and I see that as kind of almost an extreme. Either you're living an embodied Catholic faith, sacramental faith, or you're not interested in this at all.
Right. Well, and there's something very interesting in America, and it would be good to talk to someone with more expertise on this, because I don't know a lot about it, but Alexis de Tocqueville, right, who a Frenchman who came to the United States and traveled around and sort of did a cultural and political assessment and wrote this famous work, Democracy in America.
Yeah.
He also assessed the religious atmosphere of America and said something like, this is an unstable situation. It will tend in the end towards atheism or Catholicism.
Interesting.
Which is a wild, this is
and
like
so when
200
did he write
years
that?
ago.
200 years ago.
This is it's a wild thing.
Okay.
And I don't know enough about it to speak
No,
intelligently.
but that would be
you know.
so interesting to dig into like the rationale and reasoning
Yeah.
behind.
What did he see?
Yeah. And then to hold it up, like superimpose it over what we are actually seeing
Right.
right now and stuff, which I think brings the question then, like, why? What would be some of the reasons for this shift?
Right.
And again, I'm conscious that we're speaking into a relatively new shift.
Yeah.
Right. So it's hard to call it a trend.
And we don't have hindsight yet.
No.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if we're looking back at this episode 2 years from now,
right,
are we going to say, oh, yeah, we really called we were at the edge of this wave? Or
was there one
we
weird
made
blip?
A big deal out of a blip?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to imagine something that crosses continents.
Yeah.
That if 2025 was like the one Easter where a bunch of people became Catholic, and then in 2026 and 2027 you couldn't see the pattern.
Yeah.
That would make sense if there was like isolated pockets.
Yeah.
I would be really shocked if as a global trend.
So part of this, like I'm thinking in terms of if we're looking at a rationale behind a global trend, and we can touch on some cultural issues and challenges that I think younger people are more conscious of that now. But I think we would be missing like a huge piece of the picture if we didn't recognize that we're just on the edge of, or the outside edge of, a global pandemic.
Right.
Like a single instance that affected the entire global population for 2 years.
Right. When you look back and write the history of this era.
Yeah, it'd be hard pressed
in the
to
church.
not see that as some kind of influence. And then the question is, well, why? What is it that did?
And at this stage, we're hypothesizing pretty wildly.
Yeah.
But well, let's go back in time and remember. So you shut down churches for Sunday worship.
Yeah.
Then
shut down everything, even for like what we've talked about before, secular worship.
Right.
So the sports gatherings and other social events and gatherings, and all of those kinds of, whether they're less formalized or whether they're more like formalized ritualistic human gatherings and stuff. Right.
So I'm imagining two, and there may be more, but in my mind, there's two big factors that I think would be worth digging into when thinking about how the line from COVID to whatever we're seeing now. One is the churches get shuttered, and then the question is if and when anyone's going to come back.
Yeah.
And the reopening, like I think we initially conceptualized, well, they're closed and then they'll open and it'll be a big celebration because we're all back.
Mm-hmm.
But the opening was so gradual and slow.
Yeah.
That there was never a now it's open moment.
No,
right?
There was so much caution in people. Like it took.
Well, and there was ups and downs.
There was.
And it varied a lot based on what the local government decided to do or not, or And
I would even say after we got as a society back to normal living, air quotes, normal living, it still took some time for people to get used to just being around other people again.
Yeah. Well, people don't drink anymore. They don't go to the theater anymore.
Yeah.
Lots of things that people had typically done, they got used to not doing because they found other ways of meeting those needs at home.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so a whole range of industries, like the restaurant industry had to deal with big changes.
Yeah.
I already said theaters.
Theaters are still trying to recover.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, bars, I mean,
yeah.
One fascinating thing in cultural history is how social drinking has dropped off dramatically.
Yeah.
Right. So all of those things are related. So what we saw is some people got used to not going to church. There are still people today who are more or less committed Christians who do their church virtually on Sunday.
Yeah.
Right.
There was a huge rise, and a number of communities have maintained virtual campuses,
right?
For
YouTube
Christian
mass
worship.
and yeah. So that's a dynamic. So we saw for a while it looked like they weren't coming back. I don't have the timeline, but into 2022 at least, it was we may never recover.
Yeah.
From that dip.
I would go into 2023.
Maybe into 2023. Yeah. And then I remember seeing the day on Facebook where I don't know if it was a diocese or whatever, but my friend Charlie, who's been a guest on the show, was posting like, we're back to the baseline of pre-COVID church attendance, and it's still going up. And he was one of he's a very attentive watcher of cultural trends.
Yeah,
he was kind of like one of the first people who was like, what's happening here? So that's one, is like the not going to church thing. But the second big one that strikes me as important is COVID and the pandemic and the vaccines and vaccine mandates and all of the stuff around that also was a fundamental moment for people's relationship with institutions. And for a long time in the West, we've talked about the decline of trust in institutions, government, media, higher education, churches, etc.
Okay, interesting.
Right? And so for a lot of people, the vaccine question and how it was handled by media and how it was handled by health authorities and
other
churches,
institutions. I was going to say education institutions, churches,
everybody had to deal
systems,
with it, right? And there were some viewers know where you and I stood on the effectiveness and the morality of the vaccines,
exactly,
right?
Yeah.
But even if you are where we are on like the vaccines are safe and effective and justified, it's still pretty easy to point out various government initiatives or media things where people weren't told the whole story. There's this whole phenomena called the noble lie, right? Where you say something that's like kind of true and kind of not, but you don't tell the whole story because you want people on the right side, and that will bite you every time. So there was noble lying happening in media. There was coverage. Of course, there was actually biased coverage, but I mean coverage. There was coverage of certain kinds of things and not of other kinds of things. And people were like, "Well, how come this isn't even allowed on the radar?" So people felt like that was going on. Then we had things that I would say you had particular politicians who took stands that were almost vindictive against people who were vaccine suspicious.
Yeah.
Right. Putting additional burdens on them that were not justified by the health situation because you kind of had to put these people in their place.
Yeah.
And so you throw all that in. And one of the things that I think happened with the Catholic Church, this is quite speculative. One of the things I think the Catholic Church did better than most institutions on that. We took a stand early on that the vaccines were safe and justified, but we didn't over push on restrictions and enforcing various things.
And I mean,
in general,
at least in our diocese, we know we were in constant dialogue with the health ministry saying, okay, look, we need to move in this direction.
Right.
So how do we move this way in ways that are safe, but that are like take common sense?
And we called them out for inconsistencies, right? When they had numbers restrictions that were the same for a parish of 20 and a parish of 1,200.
Yeah.
And we're like, these buildings do not get right.
They don't accommodate the same way. Yeah.
And I even wrote a piece for the local paper, the Leader Post, that was telling the government, we're on your team.
Yes, exactly.
And we want to help counter misinformation and conspiracism, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And when you force us to abide by regulations that cannot be justified by the facts on the ground, you're actually causing a growth in conspiracy.
Undermining your own credibility. Yeah.
So that's a local example, but I've been traveling in the United States, and one of the things I'm hearing all the time there is the teachers' unions at the public school kept the public schools shuttered for a lot longer, and the Catholic schools looked to reopen much sooner.
Yeah.
And it was safe. It was already safe, and the Catholic schools were way ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
And a lot of families went to the Catholic schools because of that. And the data bears it out. Kids weren't at more risk in Catholic schools that opened up sooner. Right? There seemed to be some political calculation happening in the other place where the Catholic schools seem to be more it's evidence-based.
Yeah.
Right? And so all of which is to say, I think the Catholic Church, in many people's minds, if you talk about the last 50 years, the Catholic Church trust in it has declined as much as or more than in most of the institutions that we're losing trust in as a society. I think coming out the other end of COVID, some of those other things kept tanking, and the Catholic Church did not keep tanking with them.
Yeah.
I think we Catholics have seen a better return on public trust than, say, the mainstream media in terms of something like COVID. So I think that highly speculative, but
the other thing that I'm finding as well is we had like the formation of virtual communities, like communities through like video conferencing and like those kinds of gatherings skyrocketed through COVID. That's where you started having like streaming services, which we already had, creating like watch party functionality within their streaming services. So you and your family, around the corner that you can't go and visit, could still like gather and like watch movies or stuff together. I know we played games with our family on the West Coast and stuff online and things like that. But over time, it really, while it was easy and accessible, something within us recognized that there was something missing here.
Right.
That the virtual framework doesn't provide the kind of community that we long for.
It's disembodied.
That's it.
If you want an embodied religion, well,
yeah, we're Sacramento. We're incarnational. Can I talk to you
about Catholicism?
That's it, right? And it's like I wonder if people, like, for a while, because we're seeing this now several years out of COVID, which seems odd because it doesn't seem like it's been as long as it has. But people starting to recognize that this isn't working and there's something missing here.
Right.
Maybe without even having a name for it.
Right.
But then seeing what they're longing for in other communities.
Well, I think COVID and the lockdowns and all that kind of stuff contributed. It accelerated a lot of trends that were already existing.
Yeah.
And one of them was the fragmentation of communities.
Yeah.
Right. All kinds of things, social media, whatever else, have contributed, at least on the whole. There are exceptions and within the pattern, but on the whole have contributed to loneliness, the fragmentation of community. And this gets accelerated in COVID.
Yeah.
And one of the key things, and we'll talk, I think, in part 2, we're going to talk about the things that the converts themselves have told us that they were looking for. And one of them is community.
Yeah.
And it's in significant part because other forms of community have broken down more, right? A related thing, I think, and this is something else that the converts themselves are telling us, a major factor for many, many converts seems to be YouTube influencers.
Okay.
And so if you say, well, okay, we learned to do all this stuff online, which was, I think what you said is true, right?
Yeah.
So we have watch parties and we play board games online, and it's better than nothing, but it's not as good as the real thing.
Yeah.
One of the other things is just more and more people gained facility with things like YouTubing.
Yes. So there's a rise of commentators and influencers.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're used to complaining about certain bad apples in that space.
Yeah.
Right. And that's certainly true. But there's a lot of people doing good work. I'll share just one. I got an email the other day from a young woman who's starting a podcast, invited me to be on her podcast. And I'd never heard of her. And she said, well, I'm small, I'm just getting started. I only have 3,500 followers. And I was like, 30, I have like 200. I don't know. Like, give me your secret. Like, I don't know. 3,500, that's a huge number to me. But anyways, I didn't know who this young lady was. So I went and checked out her YouTube channel. And like the first video that got my attention is like, here's how I teach Genesis when I go into the prisons to teach Bible study. And I'm like, who are these people?
Yeah.
Like this, right?
And where have you been?
Yeah, right. And she's talking about the distinction between literal and literalistic and all this kind of stuff that, she's doing it the way that we would
we would do it. Yeah.
Right. And,
that's beautiful.
And
wow.
So I was like, absolutely, I'll be on your podcast. But like, I've noticed recently a handful of young women, because it's typically been a space dominated by men, a handful of young women who are like recent converts who are doing these YouTube channels that are really sort of invitational and open and not the ideological nonsense that sometimes concern us and all this kind of stuff. Anyways, that seems to have been a big factor named explicitly by many of the converts. And so maybe, let's put a pin in that.
Yeah.
Because what I think when we get to part 2, I want to talk about some specific things that the converts themselves have told us and what we can learn as a church about receiving these people.
Yeah. Because that's really key, right?
Yeah.
Michelle and Braden in the youth office always kind of hammer this home with communities when they're talking about like youth and young adult ministry. Is like, it's great to have like a rise of interest in young people to be part of communities, but your community really needs to make sure it's ready to receive them.
Right.
If they walk in the door and they're meeting a brick wall and they've got no place to connect and build the kinds of relationships, then we've actually done more damage.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's look at that. But before I have one more thing. You may have other things too. One more thing I want to touch on that I think fits in part 1 because it's partly a demographic question, and we've talked about that. Is these converts are disproportionately men. Yeah. This is the first generation on record in the United States where young men are more religious than young women. Yeah. So this is people are trying to figure out what's happening here.
What's going on?
And there's a bunch of things happening. And again, we're working in the midst of it. So not everything we see is super clear. No. And I mean, it's at least valuable, I think, to wonder if some of our instincts previously about what's going on in the culture and stuff, we may be seeing mirrored in this. Right. So it seems to have some relationship to this dynamic, which is widely noted, of men becoming more politically conservative while women become more politically liberal. There seems to be a political divide among the sexes, and at least some of those men who are becoming more politically conservative are also the same people who are finding religion compelling in a way that they haven't before. So there's some, I don't think, it's not the same phenomena, but there is overlap. It does make me wonder, like, if they encounter, like, I've always thought of and we've talked about Catholicism as like primarily non-ideology, anti-ideology, right? So if somebody is coming in from a politically conservative perspective, how do they receive a non-political church? Yeah. Ideally, that's what our churches would be like, and our messaging would be like, right? Like, we've often talked, like, how do we know when we're speaking or have a good idea when we're speaking the truth? It's generally because the extremes on either side are angry at us. Right. So I think one of the things we talk about in the next episode is what does discipleship look like if someone might be coming with a certain political lens that they want to impose on the church, right? Yeah. Because the church gets some things right by that lens and other things wrong. But if we flip it and say, well, from the church's perspective, this political angle gets some things right and some things wrong, right? So so I think so that's an important thing to think of when we think about receiving them. To wrap on this episode, though, to think about like the young men who are coming, whether they're becoming more politically conservative, but they're also finding religion more compelling. One of the things that I've noticed, like I'm raising 3 boys and 4 girls, right? Yeah. Raising boys today means raising people who are being told at almost every turn that they should apologize for being who they are. For existing, that there's nothing special about them, that they can't ever assert any particularity of being any kind of masculinity is shamed as toxic. Yeah. Right? A very concrete example. So Sebastian, he's my youngest boy. He's got 4 sisters around him. So he goes to gymnastics with a few of his sisters. And gymnastics is like 80 to 90% girls, right? Yeah. And that's fine. Like, I have no problem. Toby and Oscar have played mixed soccer where it's 80 to 90% boys and the girls get along just fine. And now Sebastian's doing gymnastics, which is heavily
the opposite.
And it's all great. Like, it's good for them to encounter each other in those spaces. Oh, it's fine. But one of the things you see when you go to a gymnastics club, I'm sure not just in Regina, but anywhere in North America and probably in Western Europe, is little girls wearing t-shirts about how great it is to be a girl. Right? Girls are strong. Girls are fierce.
Girl power.
You know, I'm a girl. What's your superpower?
Yes.
Right? All these t-shirts. And I don't know how many 8-year-old boys could articulate exactly what's going on, but they know.
Oh, of course.
They know 100% that if you showed up at gymnastics with a shirt that said, I'm a boy, what's your superpower?
Yeah.
That would not be welcome.
It would be problematic.
That would be. That's exactly what it. I hate that word nowadays because everything is problematic. And so what is now? We almost don't notice it because if you grew up where being a boy was basically unproblematic, and in most areas in society, men were ahead of women, it made sense to amplify women's voices, women's experience, women's skills, all this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So getting a t-shirt for my little girl that says girls are strong or whatever, like no problem at all.
Yeah.
But to think about what it's like to grow up as a boy where everyone has to talk all the time about how great women are.
Yeah.
But you have to apologize for being a boy.
For yourself. Yeah.
Well, you're going to get what you pay for. And one of the things that we're seeing is, the rise of these, like, let's be honest, idiot manosphere influencer, like people like Andrew Tate and stuff, who's a pornographer and a human trafficker, among other things.
Yeah.
But who tells men that it's good to be a man.
Yeah.
And so young men who are fed this other stuff
they're seeking some affirming voice.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
And I think the Catholic Church, now, not that there aren't poisonous, masculinities on display within Catholicism. There certainly are, but they are marginal. Even if they're loud on social media and whatever.
Yeah.
When you get into the actual communities, they're marginal. But we have language.
That's exactly
for young men that says it is good to be a boy.
Yes.
A man has a role in his family and in his community that is a call from God, that is virtuous, that is noble, that is good. And young men want to hear that. And so I think at least one factor in young men considering Catholicism in a way that they haven't in a long time is they live in a culture that asks them to apologize for being men. And here's a community that has a language and a vision of a virtuous, healthy, noble masculinity. Even something as simple as, now simple in the symbolic sense, not simple in any sort of political or sense, reserving ordination to the priesthood to men. Think what you will about how that relates to baptism and women's capacity for decision-making and authority in the community and all that. Those are important questions. But all I want to zero in on here is what it says to a young man is men are not simply interchangeable.
Yeah.
There's actually a task that is specific to them, that they're because you see these interviews with people on the street to say, what can men do? Is there anything that men are good for, uniquely good for? And they can't.
Yeah.
They're people just like gum up. They can't talk. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Right. And
they don't even really, I can see from a cultural perspective, not really even understanding where to start with the question. Right. Like,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I think this male demographic thing is, I listened to a podcast that was talking about, and I think basically everything it said is true. It was, I think, The Atlantic or something, and it was men becoming more conservative. They said, well, it's harder to get a job. It's harder to earn more than your female partner. It's harder to afford a house. So all these traditionally masculine identity markers of being a provider and whatever are harder to come by.
Yeah.
And so as a reaction to that, men are going to get more conservative. And okay, I think there's probably a lot of truth to that. They never once mentioned the fact that young men today are shamed for being men. And as a father of sons who I've watched it, I was just like, you can't actually have this conversation without talking about the scripts we have about men in our culture.
Yeah.
And anyway, that It's a remarkable blind spot for certain otherwise insightful cultural commentators.
Yeah.
Just cannot see this.
It also, so that's interesting. It makes me wonder then if, in addition to identifying that and recognizing, okay, there are some things that are particularly attractive to young men in Catholicism around these identity issues, and that to kind of get ahead of the game and ask a similar question about young women and what it is that we have to offer and give voice to for both of the sexes within our church. How do we uphold both of these? I think that is a key model to present to the world, on how we can do this distinctly.
Right. Yeah. Because, and this is go to more what we talk about in part 2. If you import the whatever, even in as healthy a way as you can, if it's predicated on this divide that we're seeing that shows up in the manosphere or whatever else you want to call it. I mean, it's great if we've got something to offer men that the rest of the world doesn't seem to be able to offer them. 3 cheers for that. But that could easily be perceived as a kind of sexism or favoritism. Yeah. And if you're not intentional about, and so I just watched an interview with two women on this topic on CNN, and the one woman who was so there was the journalist, but then the expert was a Catholic convert, a woman, who was saying like, well, some of these Catholic converts are, this very extreme form of conservatism, whatever. And some of the way they talk is off-putting to at least some women who've had these experiences. Yeah. And I wish I could remember her name, because I'd want to go look it up after. But anyways, she was very, very insightful on this point. So when you say, let's think also about what the church might have to say to women in this cultural time, I was like, I want to interview that lady, because she was super sharp. Okay. But I can't remember her name.
Oh, now you have to go looking through podcasts again.
She was African, and she had a name that I would like, a name I had never heard before. So there wasn't a place for it in my brain to be like Rebecca or Sarah or Jennifer. It was it was one I'd have to write down to be able to remember. But anyway, she was super bright and interesting. Yeah. But
very good thing.
We don't have any ladies in the room today, so we will say that is an important question that other people are better at answering.
But it's good to name it.
But it's good to name exactly.
Name that. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Well, I think we should wrap this up. Yeah.
We've mentioned part 2 about 6 times.
Yeah, about 6, 7 times. So let's do that, right? Continuing the conversation next week. We want to thank you for joining us this week on Thinking Faith. And as always, we continue to pray that God may bless you and those you love with a faith that is always seeking understanding.
St. Thomas and St. Ignatius,
pray for us.
Amen.
Amen.